It was barely 6 in the morning when the pounding started, so loud and violent it rattled the front door like a police raid. Sunlight was only beginning to stretch across Oakwood Heights, painting long shadows on our brand-new porch. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and froze as 4 men in dark uniforms marked HOA Inspector barked orders from outside. They demanded my wife step out for supposed community violations. Before I could say a word, Sarah stood calm, shoulders squared, and asked with steady eyes, "Do you have a warrant?" The men faltered, their confidence cracking, and I realized this was no ordinary neighborhood dispute. It was the first ripple of a storm that would change everything. My wife, Sarah Walker, was in her late 30s, with jet black hair tied neatly back, an angular face, and sharp eyes that seemed to read people before they spoke. She favored a dark gray sports jacket with a silver trim, fitted black pants, and simple running shoes. A small digital watch rested on her wrist, while a concealed silver sheriff's pin, though hidden, gave her a quiet air of authority. She carried herself with calm discipline and unshakable focus. I, on the other hand, was a plain mid-40s civil engineer, tall, lean, with simple jeans and a shirt. Rational and mild-tempered, I was better at building bridges than fighting battles. Then there was Greg Morrison, our self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer, late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a smug half-smile carved permanently on his face. His short hair, dark sunglasses, navy polo, and fake gun belt made him look like a knockoff cop. He flaunted a self-made HOA security badge and thrived on control, arrogance dripping from every word. But what transforms a man from neighbor to tyrant of the community? At first, it all seemed like a simple disagreement. We had built a 2-meter fence around our backyard, perfectly legal under city code. For Sarah and me, it was about privacy and safety, nothing more. But Greg Morrison claimed it blocked his view of the street and damaged the character of the neighborhood. He marched up to our door one afternoon, sunglasses perched high on his face like he was interrogating suspects, and told us we had to tear it down. His voice carried the tone of an officer barking orders, but there was no badge, no law, only his inflated sense of authority. Sarah listened quietly, nodding once, then closed the door before he could finish his rant. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next week, a letter arrived in our mailbox, heavy parchment, crisp lettering, with the intimidating header of a law firm we had never heard of. It ordered us to remove the fence within 10 days or face legal consequences. I felt my stomach drop, but Sarah only raised an eyebrow. She held the page up to the light, studied the embossed seal, then said flatly, "This is a forgery." The paper was good, but the signature was sloppy, and the contact information led to a disconnected number. Greg had tried to scare us with fake legal muscle, but Sarah's calm certainty turned my panic into simmering anger. Someone was going too far, and he wasn't even subtle about it. Soon, the neighbors began to change. People who once waved at us in the mornings now avoided eye contact. At block parties, conversations fell silent when we approached, only to resume in hushed tones after we walked away. Anonymous notes appeared in our mailbox, short, typed messages urging us to respect community harmony and stop causing trouble. Each word dripped with manipulation. Greg was poisoning the air, turning friendly faces into suspicious glances. What unsettled me most was not his arrogance, but how quickly fear and rumor spread among people we barely knew. I began to feel like a stranger in my own neighborhood. Greg's tactics grew bolder. One Friday evening, he called an emergency HOA meeting, not in the clubhouse, but right in front of our house. A cluster of neighbors gathered, half curious, half reluctant, as Greg strutted with a clipboard in one hand and his self-made badge pinned to his chest. His voice boomed with rehearsed authority as he accused Sarah of being a national security risk. My jaw nearly hit the floor at the absurdity. He spoke of classified backgrounds and suspicious behavior, painting a picture of us as dangerous outsiders. Sarah stood at the window, arms folded, watching him like one might watch a clown perform at a circus. I, on the other hand, burned with rage. How dare he drag my wife's name into his fantasy of power? As if theatrics weren't enough, Greg escalated into intimidation. Twice that month, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside at midnight. Flashlights cut through the blinds, and men in matching HOA inspector uniforms prowled the perimeter of our yard. They wore utility belts with imitation weapons, their silhouettes casting long, menacing shadows against our fence. I wanted to storm out and confront them, but Sarah pulled me back. "Not yet," she whispered. Her calmness was maddening, but there was something in her eyes sharp, calculating, that told me she saw more than I did. She wasn't afraid. She was gathering, watching, waiting. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. We were suddenly whispered about as people with hidden agendas. At the grocery store, I overheard a neighbor say we were too secretive and not who we claimed to be. It was Greg's masterpiece of manipulation, weaving paranoia into everyday conversations until the whole community buzzed with suspicion. I began to feel cornered, like the walls of Oakwood Heights itself were closing in on us. Yet through it all, Sarah remained unshaken. Every night, she sat at her desk with a notebook, jotting down times, descriptions, and patterns of behavior. Where I saw harassment, she saw evidence. Greg strutted around the neighborhood like a wannabe sheriff, patrolling with his sunglasses and fake holster, barking orders about trash cans and lawn heights. His voice carried over fences and driveways, injecting fear into people too weary to resist. Children stopped playing outside, and neighbors glanced nervously out their windows when he passed. The sense of community we'd moved here for was dissolving under his iron-fisted act. I hated him for it. But Sarah almost seemed to welcome it. She would watch him closely, her expression unreadable, as though waiting for him to make one mistake too many. One night, I finally snapped. "We can't just sit here and let him do this," I hissed at Sarah after catching another one of Greg's fake inspectors loitering near our fence. My fists clenched, and I felt the helplessness boiling over. But Sarah laid a hand on my arm, her grip firm, her eyes steady. "He's digging his own hole," she said softly. "Let him keep digging." It was infuriating to hear, but in her tone was an assurance I couldn't shake. It was as if she already knew how this would end, as if she was 10 steps ahead while I was still trying to catch my breath. The breaking point came when Greg hosted a late-night security briefing in the cul-de-sac, his fake badge gleaming under the street lamp. He rallied his followers with exaggerated tales of danger, pointing directly at our house as though it were enemy territory. He spoke of protecting Oakwood Heights and neutralizing threats. His voice carried conviction, but his eyes held a dangerous hunger. That was when I realized this wasn't about fences, or even about us. It was about power. Greg wasn't satisfied with being a neighbor. He wanted to rule, and our refusal to bow down had become the spark for his crusade. I thought I knew what kind of man we were dealing with, a bully inflated by ego. But watching him command the crowd, feeding on their unease, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. This was no harmless neighborhood squabble anymore. It was something darker, and it was spiraling fast. What Greg didn't realize was that while he played king of the block, Sarah had already begun building a case against him. He was digging his own trap, and she was holding the blueprint. Sarah's patience finally began to make sense the night she pulled a small box from under her desk. Inside lay a collection of miniature cameras, sleek and nearly invisible, each no bigger than a button. She placed them around our property with practiced precision above the garage, inside the porch light, even tucked near the mailbox. I stood by, half in awe, half unsettled. This wasn't a woman improvising out of desperation. This was someone who had done this before. "If he wants to play cops and robbers," she murmured, her voice calm as stone, "then let's give him an audience." Watching her, I realized my wife wasn't preparing for a fight, she was orchestrating one. Within a few nights, the cameras delivered results. Sarah queued up footage on her laptop, and I watched Greg's self-appointed inspectors creeping around our yard at midnight. Their flashlights cut across our fence as they whispered about equipment and taking control. But what caught Sarah's sharp eyes was not their uniforms or their cheap intimidation. It was a man who appeared in the background, dressed in a slick, tailored suit, tall with thinning hair and a predatory calm. He shook Greg's hand like a business partner sealing a deal. "That's Victor Hale," Sarah said flatly. "Real estate investor. Bad reputation. I've seen his name before in cases that never made the news." I shivered. Why would a neighborhood tyrant need the backing of someone like Hale? Sarah didn't guess she investigated. I watched her spend hours on county records, tax filings, and quiet phone calls. One evening, she slid a folder across the table. "Greg Morrison," she began. "Isn't Greg Morrison. His real name is Mitchell Barnes. Arrest record out of state. Charges: impersonating an officer, harassment, fraud. He slipped through with probation, vanished, and resurfaced here." I stared at the neat stack of papers, struggling to comprehend that the man harassing us wasn't just an arrogant bully, he was a criminal who had reinvented himself to prey on people like us. "And Hale?" I asked quietly. Sarah's lips thinned. "He bankrolls guys like Barnes, pushes families out, buys up property cheap, flips it for millions. It's a business built on intimidation." The revelation left me rattled, but Sarah never wavered. She began setting the trap. At the next neighborhood gathering, she made sure to mention loud enough for the right ears that I was storing law enforcement equipment in our garage for a work project. It was bait, carefully crafted. Within days, Greg took it. One camera captured him pacing outside our fence, whispering to Hale about confiscating the gear and handling the walkers once and for all. My stomach clenched at the audacity, but Sarah simply copied the files, labeling them like pieces of evidence. To me, Greg was a nightmare I wanted to wake up from. To Sarah, he was a suspect already walking into his own cell. Then came the knock at our door that changed everything. A black sedan pulled into the driveway one crisp morning, and out stepped a man with silvered hair, broad shoulders, and a uniform that carried quiet authority. Captain Rodriguez. He and Sarah greeted each other not like acquaintances, but like old comrades. Their handshake was firm, their smiles faint but genuine. I stood in the doorway, baffled, until Sarah finally turned to me. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice steady. My heart thudded. She led me to the table, sat me down, and revealed what she had hidden for years. She wasn't just my wife or a quiet neighbor. She was the elected sheriff of the entire county. I struggled to process it. The badge I had once thought was a memento was real. The calm discipline I had admired was forged from years of leading deputies and facing down threats far worse than Greg. I felt both stunned and embarrassed, realizing how many times I had mistaken her patience for passivity. "You mean to tell me," I said, my voice shaking with half laughter, "that you've been the sheriff all along and you let that idiot strut around with his toy badge?" Sarah's lips curved ever so slightly. "Sometimes it's better to let a fool write his own confession." Rodriguez chuckled, clearly entertained by my disbelief. "Your wife's sharper than most chiefs I've met. Trust me, Greg has no idea who he's up against." From that day on, the rhythm of our house changed. Sarah and Rodriguez worked together with the quiet efficiency of veterans. They reviewed hours of footage, highlighted timestamps, and built a timeline of Greg's escalating offenses. Audio clips captured him plotting with Hale, complaining about neighbors who lacked obedience, and boasting about being the law in Oakwood Heights. I watched Sarah move like a strategist, building a case that wasn't just airtight, it was bulletproof. For every false notice Greg had slipped under our door, she now had proof of forgery. For every late-night patrol he staged, she had video of impersonation. Piece by piece, she was dismantling the illusion of his power. But as Sarah's strength became clearer, so did my own conflict. I had always seen myself as the rational one, the calm bridge between people, but here I was, clenching my fists, filled with helpless anger, while my wife outmaneuvered an entire conspiracy. It was humbling, almost humiliating, to realize how blind I had been. Yet Sarah never lorded it over me. She would pause in her work, squeeze my hand, and remind me that we were in this together. It wasn't about her being sheriff and me being an engineer. It was about us being a team, one that Greg could never break, no matter how hard he tried. Still, the more evidence Sarah gathered, the more dangerous Greg became. The cameras captured him drunk one evening, bragging to Hale on a porch lit dimly by a flickering streetlight. "They think I'm the law here," he slurred, waving his fake badge with pride. "And when the walkers finally crack, we'll have this whole block wrapped around our fingers." The arrogance was grotesque, but the recording was gold. Sarah closed the laptop after playing it, her expression steely. "That's enough," she said softly. "He's crossed the line from nuisance to criminal conspiracy." Her voice carried no trace of doubt, only certainty. The final days before the confrontation felt like waiting for a storm to break. Sarah compiled files, labeled evidence, prepared statements, and rehearsed every possible outcome with Rodriguez. Meanwhile, Greg strutted louder than ever, convinced he was untouchable. His arrogance had reached its peak, but what he couldn't see was that every step he took was falling into Sarah's design. Watching her work, I realized something that sent a strange mixture of pride and awe through me. My wife wasn't just protecting our home, she was about to restore justice to an entire community. And Greg had no idea the hammer about to fall was carried by the very woman he had tried to crush. The announcement spread like wildfire through Oakwood Heights. Greg plastered notices on mailboxes, slid flyers under doors, and even posted a bold sign at the entrance of the neighborhood clubhouse: "Mandatory HOA assembly attendance required." The words carried no legal authority, but Greg had long blurred the line between truth and his delusions of power. People whispered in driveways and at the grocery store, dreading the meeting yet too afraid to ignore it. By the night of the assembly, nearly 30 residents filled the small clubhouse, folding chairs squeaking against the tile floor, the air thick with unease. Some came because they feared fines or retaliation, others out of morbid curiosity, and a few because they wanted to see if the rumors about us would finally be settled. Greg strutted to the front like a man on trial, determined to play judge instead of defendant. He wore his navy polo tucked tightly into pressed slacks, his self-made OA security badge gleaming on his chest, and the ridiculous imitation gun belt buckled like he was preparing for a shootout. Dark sunglasses hid his eyes, even though the overhead fluorescent lights barely lit the room. He slammed his clipboard onto the podium with a theatrical thud, silencing the low murmur of neighbors. "Thank you all for attending," he began, voice booming with forced authority. "Tonight, we must address a serious threat to the safety and harmony of Oakwood Heights, a threat that lives among us." His words dripped with drama, and every head in the room turned, some toward us, others nervously darting back to Greg. I sat in the back row, palms sweaty, while Sarah stood calmly near the aisle. Greg launched into his monologue, pacing like a prosecutor before a jury. He accused Sarah of endangering the neighborhood, of storing suspicious equipment, of having a hidden background tied to national security risks. His words grew more outrageous with every sentence, but his tone was laced with conviction. A few neighbors nodded, unwilling to question him publicly. Others frowned, confusion etched on their faces. One older woman clutched her purse tightly, as if Sarah might leap across the room at any second. Greg thrived on the tension, mistaking fear for validation. His smug half-smile widened as he gestured theatrically toward us. "They don't belong here," he declared. "And if we want our communities safe, we must act." Sarah took a single step forward. She didn't shout, didn't wave her arms. She simply pulled a small remote from her jacket and pressed a button. The projector on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly Greg's voice filled the room again, except this time, it wasn't rehearsed or controlled. The first video showed him dressed in his knockoff uniform, prowling our fence with a flashlight at 2 a.m. Gasps rippled through the audience. The second clip captured him bragging to Victor Hale on a dimly lit porch, his words slurred, his fake badge wagging in the air. "They think I'm the law here," he boasted, his voice drunk with ego. Murmurs grew louder, heads turned, and Greg's confident posture stiffened. By the third clip, Greg ordering his inspectors to make the walkers crack, neighbors exchanged looks of disgust and outrage. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady. "This man has impersonated law enforcement. He has forged documents. He has trespassed on private property, harassed families and threatened residents. And he has done so while conspiring with outside investors to strip you of your homes." She clicked again, Emails appeared on the screen, correspondence between Greg and Hale about buying properties below market after scaring families into selling. Then came the receipts. Fake uniforms, imitation weapons, purchased with HOA funds Greg had siphoned. Finally, the audio recordings, Greg whispering about neutralizing threats, Hale promising profits. Each piece landed like a hammer, breaking apart the flimsy wall of authority Greg had built around himself. The room erupted. One man in the front row shot to his feet, pointing at Greg. "You fined me for painting my shutters," another shouted. "You threatened my kids for playing basketball in the driveway." A chorus of angry voices followed, neighbors recounting months of petty harassment, intimidation, and fear. Greg tried to regain control, shouting over the noise. "It's fake! All of it! She doctored it! You can't believe her!" His voice cracked, the mask of control slipping. He pointed at Sarah, desperation etched across his face. "She's hiding something too. She's not who she says she is." Sarah didn't flinch. She reached into her jacket, pulled out her silver badge, and held it high for the room to see. "I am not hiding anything," she said firmly. "I am your elected sheriff, and I've been investigating this man for months." For a heartbeat, the room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Then came the wave gasps, whispers, and then applause. Neighbors rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, relief flooding their faces. For the first time in months, they saw the true balance of power, and it wasn't Greg's cheap badge or empty threats. It was the law, standing calmly in their midst. Greg's pale face twisted with rage. His hands shook as he reached for the fake pistol on his belt. Time seemed to slow, the entire room holding its breath. But Sarah was faster. She lunged forward, knocking the plastic weapon from his hand, twisting his arm behind his back, and snapping cold steel cuffs around his wrists in less than 3 seconds. The gun clattered across the tile floor, harmless, as Greg howled in indignation. The crowd gasped, then cheered, voices rising in triumph. The tyrant of Oakwood Heights was reduced to a handcuffed criminal on the floor of his own stage. The doors burst open, and uniformed deputies filed in, summoned by Captain Rodriguez, who had been waiting just outside. Cameras rolled as they took Greg into custody, his shouts drowned out by neighbors shouting back, "That's the man who stalked my house! He threatened to tow my car! He made us afraid in our own homes!" Every grievance poured out like a flood, the community finally unshackled. Phones recorded, live streams spread, and within minutes the story leapt beyond Oakwood Heights. Greg's downfall wasn't just local gossip, it was headline news. Victor Hale didn't escape either. Sarah presented evidence linking him directly to Greg's schemes. Financial transfers, property contracts, emails detailing how they planned to squeeze military families with intimidation tactics. Deputies led him out in handcuffs. His polished composure cracked into bitter scowls. For years, he had hidden behind business deals and legal loopholes. Tonight, stripped of his mask, he was nothing more than another criminal caught in the spotlight. Neighbors gathered outside as the police cars pulled away, their red and blue lights flashing against the night sky. Some hugged Sarah, others simply thanked her with tears in their eyes. "We thought no one would stop him," one man said, his voice trembling. "We thought we were alone." Sarah shook her head, her voice steady but warm. "You were never alone." Fear only works when people believe they have no choice. Tonight, you all saw the truth. Her words carried across the crowd, firm and undeniable. Standing there, watching my wife, the woman who had endured months of harassment, who had calmly built a case brick by brick, who had revealed herself not just as my partner but as the sheriff, I felt a pride so fierce it nearly overwhelmed me. Greg had tried to fracture us, to control through fear. Instead, he had united an entire community against him. And Sarah had given Oakwood Heights something stronger than security: justice. In the days that followed the assembly, Oakwood Heights felt like a different place. The tight coil of fear that had strangled the neighborhood for months loosened, replaced by relief, anger, and curiosity. Greg Morrison Mitchell Barnes, as his record revealed, was plastered across local news stations, his mugshot a grim reminder of how easily arrogance could disguise itself as authority. Victor Hale's name followed closely behind, headlines describing him as the architect of a suburban intimidation scheme. The charges stacked up fast: impersonation of an officer, fraud, conspiracy, harassment, misappropriation of HOA funds. The legal avalanche had finally come for them, and this time there would be no loopholes to slip through. The evidence Sarah presented was ironclad. Videos of Greg's late-night patrols, audio of his drunken boasts, emails tying him directly to Hale's investments, each piece formed a chain too strong to break. Prosecutors seized on the case, eager to make an example of men who had exploited their neighbors under the guise of authority. Watching it unfold on television, I marveled at the irony. Greg had craved power, had played sheriff in a neighborhood that never asked for one, and in the end, the real sheriff had been standing in front of him all along. For the first time in months, neighbors began to talk to each other again, not in whispers, not in fearful tones, but in open conversation. People exchanged stories about Greg's intimidation tactics, about fines that never existed, about threats whispered late at night. What had once been isolated experiences now revealed a collective wound. "I thought it was just me," one neighbor confessed at a block gathering. "I didn't know he was doing it to all of us." There was catharsis in those conversations, a release of months of tension, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. The HOA itself underwent transformation. The old structure, which Greg had manipulated like a personal throne, was dismantled. Leadership became rotating, with transparent rules, open budgets, and no room for self-appointed security officers. Residents who had once cowered under Greg's scrutiny now stepped up to volunteer, determined to ensure Oakwood Heights would never again be ruled by fear. It wasn't perfect, there were still debates about lawn heights and holiday decorations, but the discussions were grounded in fairness, not intimidation. For the first time, the HOA actually served its purpose: community, not control. Sarah, of course, declined every offer of leadership. At the first restructured HOA meeting, neighbors practically begged her to take the chair, to be their permanent leader. She shook her head firmly. "I already have a badge," she said with a faint smile. "This community doesn't need another sheriff. It needs neighbors who look out for each other." Instead, she offered something better: monthly safety classes at the clubhouse. People showed up in droves, curious to learn self-defense basics, home security tips, and how to recognize red flags in situations like the one we had endured. Sarah became more than a protector, she became a teacher, a symbol of resilience. The neighborhood itself began to heal in small but meaningful ways. Families hosted barbecues again, children played basketball in driveways without fear of phony fines, and holiday lights twinkled across houses without threats of violations. One weekend, the entire block came together to paint a mural on the clubhouse wall, a sprawling piece of art filled with bright colors, handprints of children, and the words, "Unity in Oakwood." Someone suggested creating an annual Unity Day, and the idea stuck. What had been a battleground now pulsed with life and laughter. I noticed something change in myself as well. For months I had felt powerless, overshadowed by Greg's hostility and even by Sarah's calm strength. But watching our neighborhood rebuild, I realized my role had never been about fighting it, had been about enduring, supporting, and witnessing justice unfold. Sarah had her badge, yes, but I had my place beside her, not as an accessory, but as a partner. And seeing the community rise, I finally understood that justice wasn't just Sarah's duty, it was something we all carried, in small acts of courage and unity. Greg and Hale faced their reckoning in court. The trial was swift, fueled by evidence too damning to contest. Greg's smug half-smile vanished, replaced by hollow eyes that stared blankly at the floor as sentence after sentence was read aloud. Hale tried to maintain composure, but his empire crumbled as more schemes surfaced. Dozens of neighborhoods preyed upon with similar tactics. Together, they faced years behind bars, not just for what they had done in Oakwood Heights, but for the broader conspiracy their arrogance had uncovered. The system they thought they could manipulate had finally turned its full weight against them. Months later, at the entrance of Oakwood Heights, a new plaque was installed. It was simple yet powerful: "Truth and justice guard this community." Beneath it, a smaller inscription read, "Dedicated to those who stood against fear." Neighbors gathered for the unveiling, clapping as Sarah gave a short speech. "This plaque is not about me," she said. "It's about all of you. Because justice isn't just about catching the bad, it's about standing together so the bad never wins again." Her words echoed, and I saw tears in the eyes of people who had once been too afraid to even speak. Life slowly returned to normal, though it was a new kind of normal, a stronger one. Sarah still wore her badge to work, still carried herself with the calm authority that had first unnerved Greg. But at home, she was the same woman I had always known, the one who sipped tea on the porch, jogged in the mornings, laughed at my corny jokes. Yet every so often, when I caught her studying the neighborhood with those sharp eyes, I was reminded that beneath her calm exterior was a protector who had revealed herself only when the time was right. Then, one quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood children chased fireflies, Sarah found an envelope in our mailbox. No name, no return address, just a single line written on a postcard inside. "You stopped one of them. There are more." The words chilled me, a reminder that Greg and Hale were symptoms of something larger. I looked at Sarah, expecting worry, but she only slipped the postcard into her jacket pocket, her face unreadable. "Then we'll be ready," she said softly. And just like that, I knew the story wasn't truly over. Oakwood Heights had been saved, justice had been served, and a tyrant had been dethroned. But the legacy left behind wasn't just about one victory, it was about a community that had rediscovered its voice, a reminder that fear crumbles when truth steps into the light. And as I watched Sarah walk back into the house, badge glinting faintly in the twilight, I understood that some battles don't end with one arrest. They live on in vigilance, in unity, and in the quiet strength of people who refuse to bow to tyranny ever again.